Greetings and welcome. After playing Pokemon Go for about 30 days, I have been contemplating how do I feel about this game overall? How does it measure up to what my ideal Pokemon game is? Does it capture the principles and tenets, the spirit of Pokemon? I will say right up front that I am enjoying this game quite a bit. I do find it very basic. I have seen the same bugs or design flaws, maybe, that others in the community have talked about. Obviously, this is a big deal. But what I want to try and focus on here are messages that I think could potentially help Niantic or other game developers to kind of make sure that people are getting the most out of this game. So let's just jump right in, and this full report will be available in PDF form. There will be a link in the description of this video. So this is just my pure observation and opinion, my speculation after about 30 days with the game. This in no way reflects anything official from Niantic or from Pokemon Company or Nintendo. This is purely just my own thought process after being quite passionate involved with the Pokemon community for about 18 years. So let's jump in. These are what I feel are the 10 most important guiding principles of any Pokemon game in the Pokemon universe. They are reflected in the theme song. They're reflected in the statements on the Pokemon and Nintendo websites. They are reflected in the material that comes with each game, whether it be video game, trading card game, etc. And I feel that I've kind of broken these down, actually, oddly enough, similar to the sequence in the lyrics of the Pokemon theme song, but broken these down based on kind of their importance. Now, each of these principles affects and impacts the other principles in a complicated web, but these were the core that I identified, and this is kind of the scale or the framework that I'm going to judge Pokemon Go against. First and foremost is personal growth. So as I play the game, how do I grow as a person and how do I measure that? And this isn't necessarily saying, what I bring to the game. It's what features are in the game that allow me to accomplish personal growth. Second is pretty much straightforward, collecting. So there's two forms of this. One is actively going out and catching the Pokemon. One is cataloging them or filling up your Pokedex. And for some people, these principles may not be as weighted as they are for me. Some people may think collecting is the least important thing and battling is the most, but this is kind of how I see them. The third is growing and connecting with others. Now, specific to the game, this is going to be how you grow your personal team of Pokemon and treat your lead Pokemon. But it also does stray into the areas of teaming up with other people if there's a collaborative element to the game. Now, traditionally, Pokemon games are completely single player, except for really the battling and the trading, which we'll get to in a bit. So the fourth thing is adventuring and exploring your world. This actually started as my number one because I think Pokemon Go, the first word Pokemon really reflects the collecting and the second word Go really reflects exploring your world. But after quite a bit of thought, I decided that this is the fourth most important thing because it is, I think the top three things are more noble goals. And exploration is great, but you can easily accomplish the first three things right in your own home with an ideal Pokemon game. The fifth is your bonding, and this is different than number three. So this is how you identify your team, how you bond with your peers and your rival in the Pokemon games, as opposed to number three is more about influencing their growth. 5 is just making that relationship connection. 6 is experiencing the hero's journey or the overall story of the games. That is very important in role-playing games. 7 is some form of competition, in this case battling. Honestly, this could probably be the number 10 on my list. I don't feel it's that important or the thing I like at all most about games. It's one of the least important things. But I also lump in things here like the fashion shows and other competitive things within the game, not just battling. But I'm going to focus on battling for the purpose of Pokemon Go. I think all of the above and below points really need to exemplify fair play and good sportsmanship. That probably goes without saying, because and is very closely tied with the ninth principle, which is it has to be kid friendly and kid accessible. I mean, first and foremost, Pokemon was and I think always will be aimed at like the 10 to 12-year-old scene. Now, it just so happens that the current generation of our population are the kids that were 10 and 12 when Pokemon first came out, and now they are the folks with full-time jobs and families showing it to their kids. So we're at that sort of perfect point in recurrent history where we are 3 generations, wherein a generation is every 7 years, from the initial launch of a fad, and now it has come back as both nostalgia as well as is still alive for a fresh new audience. And then the last, which I almost didn't put on this list at all, however, besides battling, trading is actually one of the big tenets of Pokemon, because it's how you get it does 2 things, I think, for kids. One, it teaches them about basic economy, supply and demand, and 2, it helps them understand scarcity of resources in terms of trading for things that you can't locally get. So you might specialize in, your starter Pokemon is a Charmander, and you breed it to get more Charmanders, and you trade those Charmanders to someone else who has a Bulbasaur. So it really has a lot of good lessons in it. So I've added this one as number 10. So again, these are the 10 frameworks that I'm kind of scoring. How does Pokemon Go measure up and meet each of these 10 tenets of a Pokemon game? Okay, so keep in mind, this is the first release of Pokemon Go, very early on. I think super highly of this app because A, it is a great concept. B, it's never been done before. It does encourage people to get out of the house and exercise. And I think it was a brilliant design choice to leverage Niantic's data from Ingress, as well as some functionality, as a baseline for Pokemon Go in the real world. I think without that design choice, this never would have been popular. And even though it's not a perfect fit for all the tenets or principles, I think that was a great design idea. So if this looks a little bit more red or orange to you than green, just keep in mind that the whole purpose of this video is to point out where I think this game overall could grow. So personal growth, growing others, and competition, I've got kind of in the yellow color. I think the game has some of this. It's starting. It's got the bare minimum bones of being able to do these kind of things, but there is definite improvement that needs to be made there. I think collecting Pokemon, exploring your world, and general fair play, good sportsmanship. This game does a great job of, doesn't need any immediate changes, although I do have some recommended improvements. And then the red tenets, bonding with your team, experiencing a story or the hero's journey, being kid-friendly, and trading are either non-existent or have major flaws in them. So we're going to break down each of those groups of ratings, if you will. So first we're going to start with the good. So collecting, I think this game has the ability to seek out rare Pokemon. It has a Pokedex, which actually has different levels of data depending on what you've seen versus what you've caught versus just seeing the shadow. I think that gives you multiple levels to sort of your collecting, how deep you want to get into collecting. I think the catch mechanic of catching Pokemon, while at first I was a little concerned that it didn't include more of the battle, I think it's actually appropriate to the platform and the environment, which is to say, if I'm walking down the sidewalk and I want to stop and catch a rare Pokemon, I only want to spend a few seconds doing it. I don't want to stand there for 3-4 minutes and have a full battle and throw 100 Pokeballs and then walk 5 feet, stop again. The whole Go part of Pokemon Go is supported by the simplicity of the catch mechanic. I think the egg hatching is also a really great mechanic that helps you with your collection. It's got some random number generation, and it also encourages getting out and moving around. So from a collecting perspective, I think the game does a good job. I think there's an obvious and already in progress change needed for the nearby tracker. So I actually didn't count that against collecting. Although I think, if that Niantic didn't say at this point that that was something they're fixing, this would have probably gone into the yellow category. And then I think room for improvement, they really need to be thoughtful about how they introduce new Pokemon after this 151. And I think they need to work out some other bugs before they do that. But it's not an issue, it's just a recommendation. Now, I will also say there are other recommendations I have in this report that also, again, reflect back or sync up with collecting. But these were the core ones that I wanted to mention for this category. So the second principle that I think the game does a good job of is giving you the adventure, letting you explore your world. I think it does a great job of letting you explore your own neighborhood because it does give you something. And for kids who can only get around their neighborhood and not go beyond their neighborhood, I think it's great. I think it does open up the ability to find new landmarks, historic sites, or even revisit places from your past that you may not have thought about in a while, just by encouraging you to go out and basically walk down every street and try every alley and see what's there. I think it's also a very good way to meet others on their own adventure, and we've seen that through many, many, many different examples. Now, where do I think it could be improved? I think your ability to plan before exploring your own neighborhood is something that they should think about. So what I mean by this is, right now, if I wanted to drive, 5 minutes from home, 10 minutes from home, and into another suburb or to a shopping area outside of my, housing subdivision, I really have no clue what's there until I get there. So I kind of know at a huge 50,000 foot level that if I go to another country, I have a better chance of finding the region specific Pokemon. And I think that if I go to a desert, I should find more desert Pokemon. If I go to the ocean or a lake, I should find more water Pokemon. But I can't say that is fully optimized yet. I think there's not enough Pokemon of different types to really see it clearly, but also I do see pretty much every Pokemon within an hour of my house. So I can't say that there is a good way for me to plan going beyond my neighborhood. Now, that said, an app like Pokevision or an online community where we talk about where the nests are allows me to plan and target and go find specific areas outside of my neighborhood. And I feel like Pokemon Go would be good to capture some more of these functions that will allow you to plan for further exploration beyond the world you know. Fair play and sportsmanship is kind of the third principle I think the game is currently doing a good job of. A lot of this is because there really is no interaction right now. I think all the Pokemon on the map are catchable by all nearby players. So if I walk up to a street corner and I see a Dragonite sitting there, I can catch him. Everybody else walking up to that corner can also catch him. I'm not camping him and stealing him from other players. That's awesome design. There also seem to be player-specific Pokemon spawns over time, meaning if I'm walking around, I can see what's on the nearby list, but every once in a while, something will show up that I have access to that doesn't seem to be based on the map. And that's actually good because for people who are, kids who are stuck in their own neighborhood and don't really have a way of getting out and about, this gives them some chance of seeing other Pokemon, which I think is great. Now, I will say the biggest room for improvement, and I could have put this in a lot of different categories, but I chose to put it here, is that players in rural areas have a huge disadvantage to players in urban areas. What I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you live in the big city. You probably have Pokestops all up and down your block, and because of all the cell phone traffic in your area, Pokemon are spawning a lot more often. You can use those Pokestops to get free Pokeballs anytime you want, and you generally won't run out. People out in rural area, like in my neighborhood, there's one particular corner where Pokemon always spawn, and it's usually a bunch of garbage Pokemon at this point. I shouldn't say garbage, I should say low level Pokemon, Rattatas and Pidgeys. And then I would say like maybe once or twice a day, a decent, somewhat rare Pokemon will show up, like a Haunter or a Slowpoke or something like that. Whereas, I'm talking to people who are on college campuses, who are in highly trafficked areas, and they're just overloaded with stuff. They don't even need to go outside of their house. People are just sitting in their houses catching tons of Pokemon. And that doesn't seem right to me. Thinking about wild animals in general, you would think that urban areas, highly peopled areas, yeah, they're going to have birds and Rattatas everywhere. That's fine. And they're going to have bugs everywhere. But they're going to have less wild animals, whereas somebody who lives out by me, where one direction is a cornfield, one direction is a housing subdivision, one direction is a forest preserve, there's going to be a lot more wild Pokemon. We have deer, we have ducks, we have a lot of other creatures in the real world, and Pokemon's not quite reflecting that. All right, now we get into some of the attributes or principles that could use a lot more work. So personal growth, my own personal growth. So right now there is XP and levels for me as a trainer, and that gives me access to higher powered Pokemon, but not necessarily different types of Pokemon. And there is a pretty good set of achievement badges in my opinion. Now, the biggest change that absolutely needs to be made in this game is that as you get higher levels, it should not get harder to catch the same Pokemon. So when I was level 1, I could catch a level 50, a CP 50 Pokemon fairly easily. As I got to level 10 and now level 23, catching that level 50 Pokemon is a lot harder, and it shouldn't be. It should be the opposite. It should be easier based on your level, but you get access to higher Pokemon, which, because of the curve, continue to be hard to catch, but those lower level Pokemon should be easier as you go up. I think that needs to be balanced. I mean, that's basic game design 101. Now, there's also room for improvement if you want to connect Pokemon Go back to the original Pokemon games. One of the coolest things in those games was the sequence of gym badges, which give you access to control higher level Pokemon, or give you HMs and TMs, different buffs in the game. I think a long-term change would be cool to see some sort of badges tied to gym progression. Maybe, the more gyms you beat at certain levels will give you some special badges, and you can collect the badges of different types. I think that was always something pretty cool in Pokemon. Next principle I want to talk about is growing others, and in particular growing your team of characters. So currently you can raise their CP and you can evolve them through candy. That's pretty much the only interactive mechanism you have. And it seems like the amount of candy that you get when transferring Pokemon to the professor should be variable and should be more maybe based on the CP of the Pokemon. Getting one candy per Pokemon for something that needs 400 to evolve and is also, by the way, rare to catch is like a snowball effect. I don't want the game to be too easy, but it can't be. It feels a little bit unbalanced. The Pokemon that are easily accessible are too easy to maintain, and the ones that are too hard to maintain once you get them. So then there's, general room for improvement beyond that. I think critical change. I think earning candy through other methods like competition or battle in the gym would be cool. And I think it would really be cool if you could actually pay your candy instead of evolving or raising just CP, but actually for learning new moves. and putting more variety into the move set of the Pokemon, giving the player some control of how they grow their team, I think would be a good idea longer term. So competition is something that is very basic right now for gyms. I do like the fact that each Pokemon has at least two moves that are, of traditional moves from the game, so they're pretty well represented. And I do like the fact that the types like fire versus grass versus water, the effectiveness and weakness of attacks is in the game. It's not a perfect system, but I like the fact that it's in there at all, because that is a core thing of what makes a Pokemon a Pokemon. Now, I think what really needs to be changed, though, is some more direction in your battle and not real-time tap spam. So Pokemon has never been a real-time attack spamming game where you're clicking and you're swiping and you're quote-unquote dodging, but doesn't really work because of the timing of the servers. I really think it should be turn-based battles or some other some other mechanism than tapping. I really feel like that is not the optimal design. If you know that you're going, so when I talked about catching a Pokemon and not needing to battle because you'd be just standing in one place for too long, that applies to moving around and collecting. But when you are intentionally stopping your human movement at a gym, you're intending to stand there for a few seconds or minutes and have a battle and compete and then move on. So I think turn-based battles would not be a bad thing as opposed to the real-time battles from that perspective. And then general room for improvement. So the needed change is something that really has to be addressed, in my opinion. And then there's general room for improvement. I'd love to be able to have trainer versus trainer battles, let's say at Pokestops or even out in the wild in the middle of nowhere. A lot of kids that play against each other, they don't have access to Pokestops. Or, I'm home at night with my son and we can't go out looking for Pokemon because it's dark. But we could maybe have a challenge against each other. I think it would allow us to do something, especially as the winter's coming on in the next couple months and it's going to get colder and people are not going to be outside as often. I think this would be a really good feature. Okay, so now we're getting into the areas that I think need the most improvement. I think one of the key things about Pokemon is making friends and growing that Pokemon bonding, or bonding with your peers, people that join you on your journey, or your rival. So I think first and foremost, the game has a mechanism for creating a Pokemon team, and the way you can do it is by favoriting your top 6 Pokemon, right? And you can also nickname your Pokemon, which I think is great, but it doesn't really do much because a lot of times you collect that Pokemon and he sits in your inventory, but you never use him for anything. So there's no bond created whatsoever. There's no sense of having a team or a lead Pokemon. I think that is a huge change that's needed in this game. Something that really lets you connect with your favorite Pokemon and have them as part of your team. Now, one suggestion that I have is that Pokemon should assist you during capture, even if it's just cosmetic. When you are walking on the map, show your Pokemon walking with you, and make it an option that you can turn off if you don't want to see that. And when you go into a battle with a Pokemon, you can have your Pokemon sitting off on the side or maybe shooting attacks at the Pokemon you're attacking to kind of distract them or weaken them, just like it is in the games. Again, it can be cosmetic, or your Pokemon could actually provide a bonus. Let's say I've indicated that my Pikachu is my lead Pokemon, so every battle I go into, my Pikachu's right there with me, and maybe every once in a while there's a random chance he can do a shock attack, which paralyzes that Pokemon or statics that Pokemon. It just makes it a tiny bit easier to catch. You don't have to include the whole knockout mechanic or the turn-based battles, but just kind of having them along, I think, would help people connect with the Pokemon they're catching a ton. Now, there's smaller improvements that I'm also recommending at this time, and one of them actually I think is very impactful to me, but it's probably a small thing to others, is that when I do give my Pokemon a nickname, it nowhere on the that Pokemon's listing when I click on them, nowhere does it tell me what type of Pokemon it is anymore. So for Pokemon that are fairly similar, like let's say Clefairy and Clefable, or even Zubat and Golbat, if you're looking at it on a tiny phone, the two silhouettes could very easily be confused for one another. And so, like, if I name, one of them peanut butter and one of them jelly, then I click on them, there's no way for me to tell which one was the Zubat, which one was the Golbat anymore, unless I just recognize the shape. So I feel like that piece of text, the type of Pokemon, should stay with it, even if you nickname them. And then the other thing for improvement is maybe some type of friends list, and maybe the ability to do like a shout out where, let's say you catch a rare Pokemon, you can click something and it sends just a brief little message to everyone on your friends list, like just caught blah blah blah, or just leveled up. Yeah, you wouldn't want to create a spam, but I think a little bit more interaction would be nice, especially if you're, quote unquote, on this Pokemon journey with your friends, right? That's kind of bonding with your peers and your rival. Now, a purely cosmetic change, in my opinion, would be something more around the story or the hero's journey. There's no story in this game. You start off, you meet this person called the Professor. You never see him again unless you click on the tips, and you're supposedly transferring Pokemon to him, and he's turning them into candy in his little factory. And but there's no story. Like you aren't following any kind of storyline. Now, a lot of people don't need a story. They're just out there to collect and battle. But I feel like this is something missing from Pokemon in general. So I feel like periodic interaction with the professor at certain like milestones would be good. Maybe he pops up and says something to you, or quote unquote gives you something instead of things just appearing in your inventory. It's all it would take. And potentially periodic interaction with your team leader. So if you're on Team Mystic, Blanche, should show up when you beat a gym, or just a little bit more interactivity would, I think, improve the overall feeling that you're on an adventure story. Now, beyond that, I think there's a lot of room for improvement here. I think things like quests or interacting with other NPCs like Nurse Jenny or Nurse Joy or Officer Jenny, for example, would be, very much in the spirit of Pokemon, give you quests. And then again, I talked about this with battling, some succession of gym battles. Like, the story of Pokemon is that you are, catching and training up your team to take on a gym, which allows you to take on another gym and eventually get to the Elite Four. Like, I feel that whole feeling is missing from Pokemon Go right now. All right, last two, kid-friendly. Sorry to say, this game is really not kid-friendly, and I think I would be very interested to know if Niantic and the Pokemon Company are aiming this at kids, or aiming this at teens, or middle-aged people for that matter. So here's what the game has. The microtransactions, I feel, are very appropriate. They are not forced on you. And in fact, they're really not needed if you have access to Pokestops and you're able to get new Pokeballs through some other mechanism. Then there's really not a need to pay money to the game. And if you do pay the money to the game, it doesn't help you get the Pokemon faster, except for incubators. So I feel like pay to win is not an issue yet. Now, there is no tutorial in this game, which is, to me, is a basic problem for not being kid-friendly. Whereas the microtransaction is a positive, is being kid-friendly. I think I would skip through the tutorial, but I think some kid just playing it who doesn't sit on the internet all day and doesn't have access to the community to know all the tips and tricks, I think a little bit of hand-holding that you could turn off or on would be good. The biggest issue, which I already talked about, is a lot of rural neighborhoods don't have any spawn. So my neighborhood probably has 24 kids in it, all from high school age down, and a lot of those kids, they ride their bikes around the block, but they don't go much farther than that. And there's only one place that Pokemon spawn, and there's no Pokestops, so there's really not. It's not very friendly to them, to be honest with you. And a lot of the Pokestops and gyms are based on adult landmarks, places either that kids can get to, or like restaurants, stores, places that you don't want a bunch of kids just going to and abusing, because they're just not for kids. But things that are kid friendly would be like parks and playgrounds. Now, there's the opposite effect of, do you really want to attract adults to those places? So in general, though, right now the game is not aimed at young kids, in my opinion. And that's also exemplified that high level gyms are really not accessible to new players or young players who are only level 7 and haven't had a ability to get up to level 25 because they can't get out of their neighborhood. You go to any gym, and within 5 minutes, at least one, if not 10, cars will drive up and either check that they're still holding the gym or fight for the gym. Gyms are constantly changing hands, in my experience, both in rural and urban settings. And, kids, they just can't hold on to gyms. I feel like the bigger guys come in and stick their high level Pokemon in, and kids just don't have a chance. It's not kid friendly. So things that absolutely need to change is, I think, that rural areas should have equivalent frequency, so the same amount of spawns as urban areas. I think it's okay that urban areas have, some extra stuff spawning based on traffic. I get it, but I think there should be sort of a minimum amount of spawns even in rural areas. I should be able to walk around the block and always encounter 1 to 3 Pokemon, in my opinion. I think I'd like to hear Niantic say something that within 1/8 mile radius, there will always be at least one Pokemon. That kind of guarantees that you'll always have access to something at any time. I don't know. Maybe they feel that that's overdoing it, but it really feels very scarce and empty out here where I live. I feel like there should be some sort of NPC gym challenges as additional method for leveling up. So not just beating the gyms, the defender bonus and the 21 hour cooldown is pretty steep. There needs to be something sort of in between there. Maybe, like I said, giving you giving you candy for beating a gym, or even some sort of, daily challenges for beating gyms of a certain level, or finding a gym with, putting a certain type of Pokemon in your gym. Things like that, I think would make it a lot more interesting. And I think the biggest change for kid friendly, but also for many of these other categories, is some alternate method of regaining Pokeballs other than just Pokestops. So maybe finding or farming berries that can be then crafted into Pokeballs. Again, Pokestops are really rare out where I am, unless you're like in the downtown area, and it's just not accessible to everybody. So there needs to be some sort of equalization thing. And at the same time, maybe that means you get less balls from Pokestops so that it's not abused. I mean, right now, if I go to an area that has Pokestops, I can fill my entire bag very quickly. So you're either in excess or you're in scarcity, and it's not balanced. And then I think just a sort of a idea I have for general improvement is like spawns, if they're not already, could be based on the name of the geographical landmark. So for example, if you live on Water Street, or if you're walking down Water Street or Lake Street or River Road, I think it would be cool to see more water Pokemon spawn. If you're on Desert Trail, or if you're, I think you could probably get a dictionary of phrases and kind of, influence the types of Pokemon that spawn based on that. And that would give it more variety, and that would also allow kids to do that, beyond their neighborhood planning that I talked about earlier. So, for example, maybe they pull up Google Maps and they say like, "Hey, 2 blocks from here, there's a I don't know, the electric company, or let's say such and Forest Drive. Oh, I don't have a lot of forest Pokemon, so let's take a picnic lunch over there, and I have a chance of catching some rare Pokemon that are forest based, because and it basically it gives you a way to plan out what biomes you go into. And then, of course, trading, it just doesn't exist, not yet implemented. So obviously, this is a change that Niantic is already planning to put in. And I think the fact that there are region-specific Pokemon like Kangaskhan, Mr. Mime, obviously that is going to be the focus for trading. I have a lot more to say on how trading should work, but at this point, I think it's fair to say it's needed in general. So that's kind of my list of, how I feel Pokemon currently measures up. And if I were developers, I would take all of the features which you see in the middle column here and kind of try to understand, what do we want to add in what order? So what has the most impact on players? You have to balance that in any software development with how much effort will it take to implement that versus the urgency. So what are things that we need to critically fix versus what are things that we can't roll out too quickly because that will use up all of our fun features, right? So I just kind of brainstormed this roadmap here, and it's a monthly view. In August, they need to stop losing players, and in September, the game will have now been out for 2 months. We need to keep that player excitement at a high level, and then in October, maybe start preparing for the winter when people won't be able to go as much and they'll be inside. Give them the start of features that allow them to keep playing while they're not on the move. In November, we have Pokemon Sun and Moon coming out. So how are we going to hold interest of players while they're getting completely new Pokemon in a hopefully successful DS game? How do we keep them playing in the phone? Then we've got the holidays coming up at the end of the year, and I think by January we'll be ready for seeing another 100 Pokemon or so added to the game, and it's a little ways out, but I think. If they release some of the legendaries in the very near term, like the birds in September, and then maybe give us Ditto related to Halloween and masquerading, right? And then give us Mewtwo and Mew in November and December, I think January people will be, really craving more Pokemon to catch. I know some people have already caught them all, but those are the extreme 1%. There's a lot more people out there that will take several months before they fill their Pokedex and start to lose interest. So anyway, this is just here as a brain exercise for myself, but maybe it's useful to you or to Niantic or whatever. So that's it. That's the end. Again, this is really how I see the game. I think it's a huge, positive, good game, but I think it has a lot of room to grow. And it has a few issues that need to get fixed in the short term. So I hope you kind of enjoyed this. And I guess I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts on, what do you think needs to change in the game? And really think about it in terms of, what are your key principles? Like, why does it need to change? Is it just because you're feeling entitled? Is it because it would really help the whole community? Does it make it too easy, too hard? So I'd love to hear some thoughtful answers. And until next time, I wish you success